Okay, we're up to the Gemara on the bottom of Chaf Hei Amid Beis. The Mishnah had said that the Mishnah began by discussing a drink called temed. Temed is where you take grape skins and you soak it in water. And the Mishnah basically gave you a rule, and that is when it's unfermented, it has the status of water. When it's fermented, it has the status of wine. That was the Mishnah said. It's negeh ma'aseh sheni, it's negeh other things, paisla mikvah. But bekitzer, that's the geder advarim. So what is temed? So it's not binary. It's not water or wine. It depends. When it's unfermented, it's water. When it's fermented, it's wine. Says the Gemara, Mani Masisan, who is the author of a Mishnah? It's Loi Rabbi Yehuda, B'lei Rabbanan. It seems not to be Rabbi Yehuda, and it seems not to be the Rabbanan. Why? So we'll see in a moment. There's a brisa where Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan argue what is temed. Where the Rabbanan seem to say it's always water, and Rabbi Yehuda seems to say it's always wine, fermented or unfermented. So this machlekes seems to be binary: always water, always wine. Our Mishnah is that it's sometimes water, sometimes wine. Seems to be not like anybody. The Tani, the brisa says, hamisamed. If someone makes temed, v'nasan mayim b'mida, so he takes grape skins and he pours in a quart of water. Umatzak de midase, and when he strains it out, he finds the same quart of water. Potter, the halach is he's potter for a meiser. Why? Because the Rabbanan believe that temed is water, and water is not chayiv in Trumas HaMeisers. Rabbi Yehuda mechayiv. Rabbi Yehuda says it's chayiv. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda considers it wine, meaning, and even though it's the same quart, we assume that the water was absorbed by the grape skins, and the grape skins expelled wine to the equal of a quart. So Rabbi Yehuda feels that it's wine, and therefore it's chayiv is Trumas HaMeisers. So in other words, you have machlekes. The Rabbanan seem to say fermented or not, it's always water. The Yehuda seems to say fermented or not, it's always wine. So the Gemara says, Mani, who's the author of our Mishnah that makes a distinction between fermented or not? I Rabbanan afagav de hichmitz. I Rabbi Yehuda afagav de lo hichmitz. Who is the author of our Mishnah? So the Gemara says your presumption is not correct. What was your presumption? That Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan argue in all situations. Fermented, Rabbi Yehuda says it's wine, the Rabbanan say water. Unfermented, Rabbi Yehuda says wine, the Rabbanan say water. They always argue. It's not true. Amir Rav Nachman Rav Avua, the machlokes is b'shehichmitz, meaning Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan agree if it's unfermented that it's water. That is universally accepted. The machlokes is if it's fermented. Rabbi Yehuda says it's wine, and the Rabbanan say it's not wine. Means the Rabbanan it's always water. But Rabbi Yehuda says I only believe that it's wine when it's fermented. So Rabbi Yehuda's shita that it's wine is dafka when it's fermented, and therefore the Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah, which says unfermented is water, fermented is wine, that's now Rabbi Yehuda's shita. And when Rabbi Yehuda said wine, he meant dafka when it's fermented. Unfermented, he agrees with the Rabbanan that it's water. B'sheichim is machlokes u'masnisan Rabbi Yehuda. And our Mishnah, which says unfermented water, fermented is wine, is now the shita of Yehuda. V'chinam Rav Yossi bar Chanina b'sheichim it's machlokes. Okay. Now we'll come back to this in a few moments. It's not so pashut to say that the machlokes of Yehuda the Rabbanan is fermented, meaning unfermented everyone agrees water. The machlokes of Yehuda the Rabbanan, whether it's wine or water, is dafka when it's fermented. It's not so pashut, as we'll see. There's a machlokes about that. V'amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav Avua, temed shelachoi bekesef meiser. Oh, so we said that if temed is water, you're not allowed to use it, as the Mishnah said, because unfermented, or what did the Mishnah say about unfermented temed? Unfermented temed is water. Yeah. And if it's water, you cannot use it, you cannot purchase it with ma'aseh sheni funds. Ma'aseh sheni funds, which means money that has the holiness of ma'aseh sheni, which means you transfer the holiness of the fruit onto cash. That cash has to be used to purchase specific items. Water is not acceptable. So if I take ma'aseh sheni money and I try to purchase water, the Mishnah says it doesn't work. It's not the kesef, the kinyan is not chal, right? You cannot purchase it with ma'aseh sheni money, and therefore the kinyan seems to be not chal. Yep. So the Gemara is saying like this, but the Mishnah says, right? It's not eligible for purchase. You can't use it, and it's not chal. The kinyan is not chal. But if it's already fermented, then it's wine. Then it's fine. Zak the Gemara, Amr Nachem Rav Avua, temed shalacha bekesef meiser. Let's say you buy unfermented wine, unfermented temed with meiser sheni funds. So it's water at this point. But ulubsayv hichmitz. So at that point it's water. But then the purchaser keeps, let's say, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven gives the money. Shimon gives the unfermented temed, and it stays by Shimon. It stays by Reuven for 2 weeks. All of a sudden it becomes fermented. then it's megala lemafreya that it was never water. Meaning unfermented temed is water now, but it's in the process of becoming wine. Once it becomes wine, then it's megala lemafreya that it was never always going to be water. So it says in Gemara, "B'soif hichmitz," and then eventually it ferments kana meiser. Retroactively, the kinyan is chal, and the meiser sheni funds, the meiser sheni kedusha goes onto the wine. So the Gemara is saying like this. Yeah. Meaning the fact that it's, hold on one second. I think the point is like this. Eventually, because it eventually ferments, that shows that it was already in the process of becoming wine from the beginning. So it says the Gemara, so Rav Nachman Avua, if you buy unfermented wine, unfermented temed, with Ma'aser Sheni funds, is the kinyan chal? So the really answer is it depends. If you wait, then it could be lemafreya, it'll be chal. So says the Gemara, my taima igloi mils lemafreya de peruhu, because it's megal mils lemafreya that it was not water at the time that you purchased. It was becoming wine when you purchased it. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. So why did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said that Ma'aser Sheni funds cannot be used to purchase unfermented temed. The implication being not just that lichachila, that if you did, the kinyan is not chal. But it's not so pashut. The Mishnah should say, well, the kinyan is not chal unless you hold on to it. Meaning, the fact that if I hold on to it, it could be megalim afreya that it is a good kinyan. So why does the Mishnah say the kinyan is not chal? The kinyan is not chal implies that it's not chal at all. It's not so pashut. It might be chal. So it says the Gemara, Masisam diktani hichmitz in loy hichmitz loy. So the Gemara is asking a question. Our Mishnah just says unequivocally it's not chal. It's not so true because later on it could be megalim afreya that it is chal. So why does the Mishnah just say no good? Why not wait? Right? The Mishnah says that if you pay Ma'aser Sheni funds to purchase unfermented temen, kin is not chal. Why? That shouldn't be so. It shouldn't be not chal. It should be wait 2 weeks, and then if it turns into wine, the mafreya was fine. So says the Gemara, Dilma ishavka ha'achmitz. Perhaps if you leave it, it'll ferment. So why is the Mishnah just saying unequivocally that kinyan is not chal? So the Gemara says, Marabba keshashar menu kais v'hichmitz. The case is as follows. The case of the Mishnah which says that it's not chal at all is where I have unfermented temed, and you purchase it from whoever you have the unfermented temed. I purchase it with my Sheni funds. The Mishnah says it doesn't work. Why? Why not wait 2 weeks and see if it ferments? The case of the Mishnah is where I have a cup of it, and I say, listen, I'm going to come back in 2 weeks. Pour off a cup. I'm going to come back in 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, it still didn't ferment. Meaning it's dafka a situation, it's a very obscure case, where the Mishnah that says that it's unequivocally not chal is dafka a situation where part of it was poured off. You waited 2 weeks, so you waited the amount of time of fermenting, and nothing fermented. So there's no waiting, there's no lemafreya. But you're right, in the average case, we wouldn't say it's not chal, we would say, maybe. But now, it's dafka a case where you poured off a cup, and you waited, and it was megalim afrei, there wasn't chal. So that's the Rabbi's take. Again, it's a very obscure case. Rabbi has a different approach. Rabbi says, here's my answer. My answer is our Mishnah, which says that it unequivocally is not chal when it's at the status of water. I'll tell you why. If you wait and it'll be hichmetz, it'll be megalim afreya that it was always wine. That's assuming that if you have water now, right? It looks like water, yeah? It's unfermented grape skin water. Right now it looks clear as water. In 2 weeks, it'll start turning into wine. So Rav Nachman Rabbi Avua said, Lemafrei, it'll be megala that it was always wine. That's not so pasha. Our Mishnah disagrees with that. Our Mishnah believes that it's sort of like if it quacks, like it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Right now, does it look like water? Yeah. Does it taste like water? Yeah, it's water. In 2 weeks it'll ferment. Our Mishnah believes that in 2 weeks it'll turn into wine. Your presumption, Rabbi Nachman Bar Avua's presumption, that later on it'll be megal mafrei, it was always wine, even when it looked and smelled and tasted like water. Our Mishnah doesn't believe in that. Who is the author of our Mishnah that says that all that matters is the appearance, meaning that because it looks like water, it has the status of water? So the Gemara is going to point out that is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan and Nuri. This Mishnah, as I mentioned yesterday, this is always what's learned in a Shiva house. It's a very famous Mishnah, and basically the premise of the Mishnah is as follows: if you have Mayim she'uvim cannot be used for a mikveh. Now, Chazal made it that if you have already 40 saw, if you have a kosher mikveh, you could pour a tremendous amount of mayim shuvim. It's fine. The mikveh actually kashers. It's mitahar the water. That's the concept of our mikveh nowadays. Is you have 40 saw, and then they basically open up a spout, and a bathtub full of water gets poured in, and it's perpetually called neshika, which is that the mayim shuvim touches the mikveh, and it's fine. It's mitahar. But let's say you don't have 40 saw. I have 39.9 saw, so it's not a kosher mikveh yet. And I pour in 3 saw of water, three lugin of mayim shuvim. 3 lugin mayim shuvim passels the mikveh. That's Chazal's takana. Here's the question: what if it's 2.9 lugin of water, mayim shuvim, and 0.1 lug of milk? So the Tanna Kama says it's not 3 lug of mayim shuvim. Milk is not water. It's not 3 lug of mayim shuvim. Reich Menuri says milk looks like water. If it looks like water, it has the status of water. It combines with the other water. It's now considered 3 lug of mayim shuvim, and it passes the mikveh. So you see, Rabbi Nuri says, I don't care about necessarily what it is molecularly. I care about what it looks like. And therefore, in our Mishnah, if unfermented temed looks, smells, and tastes like water, even if it ferments 2 weeks later, right now it's considered water, and is unequivocally not a kinyan if you purchase it with Meiser Sheni funds. It says the Gemara. Rava Omar, Hamani Ravich Menuri. Our Mishnah follows the sheet of Ravich Menuri. Titanan, Shloish lug mayim chasa kurtiv. If you have a little bit less than 3 lug of mayim shuvim, Shenaf l'tichel kurtiv yayin, and wine falls into the 3 lug, less than 3 lug to make 3 lug, but 3. So now you have 2.5 lug of mayim shuvim and 0.5 lug of wine. Umareu k'mari yayin, and it looks like wine, which is completely irrelevant for our discussion. V'naflu mikvah. And then that 3 lug falls into a mikvah that does not have 40 saw yet. Lo yipaslu, it's not possible. Why? Because 2.5 lug of mayim shuvim does not passel. 3 lug does. It's 3 lug with the wine. Wine is not water because it looks like wine. I'm sorry. The Tanna Kama believes wine is not water. Then the Tanna Kama continues. Same thing. 2.5 lug of wine, of water, mayim shuvim, and 0.5 lug of milk falls in mayim, and it looks like water because milk gets dissolved. It looks like water. Enough of the mikvah, it falls in the mikvah leipaslu. Again, the Tanna Kama says it's not possible. Why? Because wine and milk are not water. You don't have 3 lug of mayim shuvim. Rabbi Nuri says the case of milk, it's a problem. Why? Because milk looks like water if it has a status of water. All that matters is the appearance. Therefore, it'll pass in the mikvah. So to our discussion, so to in our discussion, unfermented temed looks, smells, and tastes like water. Therefore, it has the status of water. The Meiser Sheni funds cannot be used to purchase it, and even when it's hichmetz 2 weeks later, that doesn't change the fact that right now it has the status of water. Okay. Now we said before that we had a machlokes. We started a daf because we had a machlokes of Yehud and the Rabbanon as to what is temed. Where the Rabbanon say it's water, Rabbi Yehuda says it's wine. Seemingly at first we thought the Rabbanon always say it's water, whether it's fermented or not. Rabbi Yehuda says it's always wine, whether it's fermented or not. And we said our Mishnah, which makes a distinction between fermented or not, is not like anybody. So the Gemara says no. Everyone agrees if it's unfermented, it's water. The machlokes of Yehuda the Rabbanon is dafka fermented. If Yehuda only said hashita when it's fermented, the Gemara says pliga de Rav Eliezer. That assumption that Rav Yehuda only said hashita, that it's wine when it's fermented, is not like Rav Eliezer, because it's clear from Rav Eliezer's shita that Rav Yehuda said his shita even unfermented. And adarabba, when it's fermented, everyone agrees that it's wine. The machlokes is dafka unfermented. So we said before, unfermented, everyone agrees water, and the machlokes is fermented. Rav Eliezer disagrees. He says the opposite. When it's fermented, everyone agrees it's wine. The machlokes is unfermented. The Rabbanon say water. Rav Yehuda says wine. And our Mishnah would follow the Rabbanon according to this calculation. Plika de Rav Eliezer, Dam Rav Eliezer. Rav Eliezer says Hakol Moedim Sheim Mafrish Lo Makam Acher Ela Im Kein Hichmetz. Everyone agrees, even Rav Yehuda, that says that you're chayiv to separate shumas and meiseres. Meaning, when it's fermented, everyone agrees it's wine, and it's chayiv and shumas and meiseres. Even, and Rav Yehuda said his shita, unfermented as well. But says the Gemara, Rav Eliezer says, everyone agrees that when you separate shumas and meiseres, you cannot use other temed to separate for this one. What I mean is like this. Normally, when you have, let's say, apples, right? I have 10 apples over here, and I have 10 apples over there. I could separate Trumas and Maisis over here, this pile for that pile. That's fine. By Temed, you can't do that. Says the Gemara, that Hakol Moedim, She'im Afrishal Makam Acher, Elam Kin Hichmetz. When it's fermented, you could. So if I have a barrel of Temed over here, that's fermented, and I have a barrel over there that's fermented, I could separate Trumas and Maisis one, I could take off from here to cover that one as well. But when it's unfermented, and Rabbi Yehuda said his shita, that unfermented is wine, Rabbi Yehuda agrees that it's chayv Trumas and Maisis, but you can't do that equation. So, pause. Two things. What you see from here is that Rabbi Yehuda said his shita, that when it's fermented, everyone agrees it's wine. It's chayv Trumas and Maisis. Rabbi Yehuda said his shita, unfermented. So you see that it's not like what we said before, that the machlekes dafka is when it's unfermented. So that's the first part. The second part is to understand why that is. When it's fermented, everyone agrees that I can take off some temet over here and cover that. But when it's unfermented, I cannot. Unfermented, Rabbi Yehuda believes it's wine, but you have to separate Trumas and Maisis from the barrel itself. You can't take from one barrel for the next. Why is that? It's very simple. I'll just say it outside, we'll say it inside. It's very simple. And that is, unfermented temed, Rabbi Yehuda believes it's wine. But why? Because it will ferment. So while it is considered wine, it's a little bit of a suffix. If I have two barrels of unfermented, they're both considered wine in halacha. Barrel A, barrel B. What if I separate from barrel A, and it turns out for barrel B, but it turns out barrel B never ferments. So it's megalim afreya, it was never wine. So I took off, and only barrel A is chayiv. So I took off from a chayiv for a potter, or vice versa. You can't do that. So when everything ferments, then it's 100%, it's like a vadai. So Rabbi Yehuda shita is unfermented is suffix wine. Suffix wine, you can't take Trumas and Maisis for the other barrel because maybe they're both suffix, but maybe that suffix will end up turning into a vadai, maybe this one won't. So you see that the machlekes is dafka unfermented, and that's Rabbi Yehuda shita. Kasavar, b'loi hichem is machlekes. Rav Elazar believe the machlekes, Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan, is when it's unfermented, meaning when it's fermented, everyone agrees it's wine. Machlekes is when it's unfermented. The Rabbi Yehuda says it's wine, and the Rabbanan say it's water. And ad kam lemchayv Rabbi Yehuda el minei ubei. But Rabbi Yehuda believes that when it's unfermented, you can only take it from the barrel itself. Aval me'al maloi, but you can't take from one barrel for the other. Why? Dilma asila frushim min achiv min apater min al pater min apater al chiv. Because maybe barrel A will ferment and not B, or vice versa, and you'll end up taking Trumas and Maisis from something that'll be chayiv for something that'll eventually be pater. Okay. One more halacha regarding temed, and then we'll start a new sugya. So, we've been discussing, is temed wine or is temed water? So, it has obviously a lot of ramifications, but one ramification is for the mikveh. I told you the halacha is that if you have maim shuvim, which is puzzle water, and you pour it connected to a kosher mikveh, that maim shuvim is now kosher for a mikveh. That does not apply to wine. You can't pour in a bathtub of wine and have it touch a mikveh and have the wine now acceptable as part of the mikveh. It doesn't work like that. It's dafka mayim. So is temed water or wine? It'll be negay of this. Tan Rabbanan had temed actually hichmetz. If you have unfermented temed, which is considered water in halacha, go to the next page. Mashka b'mayim. You can have it contact with a mikveh and it'll be purified. But mishehichmetz. But once it ferments and it's wine, ein mashika b'mayim. You can't do that anymore because wine cannot be poured into a mikveh. You can't dip. You can't have a bathtub full of wine that touches a mikveh and bathe in the bathtub and consider it tahar. It doesn't work. Now, seemingly, all temed water, unfermented temed, of maim shuvim, or tameh, whatever it means, should be able to just be poured into a mikveh and it should be fine. Rava seemingly makes a distinction. It's hard to understand what this distinction is based on, and the Gemara instantly rejects the distinction. Rava says, Lo yishanu shetimdoi b'mayim tayrim. It's dafka the case where you're able to do this is where the unfermented temed became tameh, right? Let's say it became tameh. It's not just maim shuvim, it became tameh. So it became tameh where it was originally tahar when it was poured into the sediment. So you have the water and the sediment together. Then the water and sediment mixture became tameh together. That's when it can be touched into a mikveh. V'nitma. Aval tameh meikara, but if you pour tameh water over sediment, loy, it doesn't work with hashaka. You can't pour it connected to a mikveh. And what's the distinction? It's hard to understand exactly the distinction because at the end of the day, the premise is tamei water can be purified by touching a mikveh. What do I care whether it was originally tamei before it was added to the ingredients, it would become tamei afterwards? It was an afkamina. So the Gemara says, "Azol Rav Gabia Mebe Kasel." Rav Gabia Mebe Kasel went. Amr Shmaita can be the Rav Ashi. He said this distinction from Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi said, "Ma'ishna tamei meikar deloi." Why is it that when it was originally tamei water and was poured into the temen mixture that it cannot be purified through hashaka? Damina aidi demai yakir shchine tatoi. Is it because that we say that the tamei water is heavy and it settles on the bottom? So when it's being poured in, so meaning, is it because tamei water is not, meaning unfermented when it's tamei is wine? Is that your cheshbin? Pera kafim le'el loika solke hashaka l'maya ihachi tayrim musayf nitmunami. Then there's no distinction. I mean, in other words, I don't understand your chiluk. If it's water, it should be fine. So what are you going to say? Well, if it was tamei water poured over the salmon, then it's wine. That's not a thing. The Gemara says el mevavli, hachanam mevavli. I don't see the distinction, and therefore the Gemara concludes there is no distinction. Okay, from here for the next two Mishnayos, basically they're talking about girls have development ages. You have a katana, which is from a child until she's bas mitzvah. For the 6 months after she's bas mitzvah, 12 to 12 and a half, she's considered a naira, and 12 and a half to onward, she's an adult, a begeris, she's an adult. So you have katana till 12, 12 to 12 and a half is a naira, and then naira on, and then katana, and then 12 and a half, she's a begeris, she's an adult. So it says the Mishnah, kol makam sheyesh mecher. Whenever your father is able to sell the daughter, the halacha is that a father is able to sell the daughter as a slave, which is a katana, until bas mitzvah. So whenever the father is able to sell, i.e. until bas mitzvah, in knas, there's no penalty. What this is referring to is that if a man seduces or rapes a girl, he has to pay the father a certain amount of financial penalty. The pasuk specifically says when she's a naira. So that means that it starts when she's 12. So before 12, there's no financial penalty. There's other punishments. Obviously, the Bezdin would beat the living daylights out of the guy, but then there are other punishments. People shouldn't think that this crime goes unpoliced. But the point is, there's no overlap. The sale is till 12. You're able to sell a daughter till 12, but the penalty begins at 12. So there's no overlap in the ages. The sales, the ability to sell her is until 12. And the ability, and the beginning of knas is from 12 onwards, so there's no overlap. Rav Yidam clarifies. Zu div Rab Meir. This shita, the Mishnah that says that there's no overlap, is a shita of Rab Meir. The Chacham disagree, because the Chachamim believe, as we'll see in a moment, they believe there is a knas for a child under bas mitzvah. So according to them, under bas mitzvah, until she's a naira, there's both knas and sales. They disagree with our Mishnah. The Tanya, the Brisa speaks it out. From a girl when she's a child, when she's born until she's 12, the father is able to sell her. But there's no penalty until she's 12. From the age of 12. Penalty, by the way, is only from 12 to 12 and a half. So from the age of 12 until she's 12 and a half, then there's a penalty, but there's no sales. Meaning sales till 12, penalty begins at 12. There's no overlap. Divra Meir, Sheir Meir, because the Meir used to say, Kol Makom Sheish Mechar in Knas, Kol Makom Sheish Knas in Mechar. There's no overlap. Chum disagree. The Chum say no. Ketan B'Ashalosh Shana V'Yom Echad Tivgar. From the age of 3 onward until she's 12 and a half, Yesh Lo Knas. There is a Knas, meaning so there's a sales until 12, but there's Knas from 3 till 12 and a half. So there's an overlap. The Gemara clarifies, Knas ein mechalo, elayim af knas makam mecher. When it says that there's a knas until 12 and a half, it doesn't mean that there's no sales. There's sales till 12, but there's knas till 12 and a half, but there is an overlap for those 9 years before that. Okay. One more halacha, and then we'll do the final Mishnah, which is not related to this discussion. Again, 12, katana is till 12, naira is 12 to 12 and a half, then a begeris, she's a begeris owner. Another halacha regarding a girl's development age is that there's a concept called miyun. Miyun means that if the father dies and the brothers marry her off, so that's considered a rabbinic marriage. The halacha is, if she's under bas mitzvah, she could just say, I don't want to be married anymore, she walks away. You don't need a get. It's called a miyun. So, miyun is till 12. Now, chalitza begins at 12. So again, no overlap. So our Mishnah, again, no overlap because there's mian until 12, but there's only chalitza beginning at 12. So I'm Rabbi the Marav, Zudev Rev Meir. Again, this is a shita of Meir. The Chum disagree because they actually say that mian goes further than you said. We said, when does mian go to? Till 12. Chalitza begins at 12 according to everybody. You can't do chalitza before 12. Katana does not do chalitza. So chalitza begins at 12. Rav Meir says, well, mian is until 12, so there's no overlap. The Rabban disagree. Mian, they actually believe that mian is a little bit past 12. It's from when 12 is when the girl has shtei cyrus. They believe it's a little bit past that. It's when the shtei cyrus are long enough to fall, to like, not just grow, but to actually lay down on the skin of the body, which is, let's say, a couple months later. So according to the Rabbanan, there is a few month overlap where she still can do mian, and she now can do chalitza. So there's a few month overlap. When can a girl do mian until? Meaning, when is the end of mian? Until she's 12, says Rav Yehuda says, Rav Yehuda says it's a little bit longer, it's a little bit past that. It's from when the hair is actually lie flat. It's a couple months later. So there is a little bit of an overlap. Okay. Final Mishnah. The Mishnah says, there's a situation with Yom Tif where there's tkiya, where they blow shofar, not shofar of Rosh Hashanah. This was the shofar of Erev Shabbos, as we'll see in a moment the case. There is a situation where there's shofar, but no havdalah. In tkiya, an opposite. Whenever there's havdalah, there's no shofar. What does this mean? This is referring to the following situation. This is referring to a 3-day Yom Tif, but Yom Tif being on Friday or Yom Tif being on Sunday. So Shabbos and Yom Tif, not 3-day, whatever, 2-day, whatever it is. Shabbos and Yom Tif being next to each other, like we just had Shavuos and Eretz Yisrael. But the Mishnah clarifies. Whenever we say there's Havdalah, there's no shofar. I'm sorry, Yom Tif, the first case. Yom Tif shechali is be'erev Shabbos. If Yom Tif is on Friday, and then Shabbos. So the halacha is that on Friday afternoon, right before Shabbos, this is Yom Tif, right? Like Eretz Yisrael just now, you had Shavuos on Friday, and then you had Shabbos. Right before Shabbos, they would blow shofar. The blow shofar was to tell everyone, stop cooking, it's about to be Shabbos. Meaning, on Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook, you're allowed to do certain things, you're allowed to carry, whatever it is. Shabbos is coming, so the blow shofar. But in that situation, is there Havdalah between Yom Tov and Shabbos? No, there's no Havdalah. So there's Tkiya, but no Havdalah. Taikin v'loy mavdilin. Opposite. Let's say Matzei Shabbos goes into Yom Tov. So when Shabbos is over, they're not going to blow shofar. To tell people Yom Tov is coming, there's no need. Shabbos is more severe. But there is Havdalah. When Shabbos ends and Yom Tov is on Sunday, there is Havdalah. There's Havdalah there's Havdalah. B'matzei Shabbos mavdilin v'loy taikin. Keitzim mavdilin. What is the nusach of Havdalah when you go from Shabbos to Yom Tov? Hamavdil bin kodesh lekodesh. You say Hamavdil bin kodesh kodesh. Rav Daisi Aimer bin kodesh chomer lekodesh kal. He adds the word chomer and kal. Okay. Hechi tekeya. How would they blow the shofar? There was a whole process of blowing the shofar on the average Friday. Blow it multiple times. How would they blow shofar differently when it was Yom Tov going into Shabbos? So Amar Rav Yehuda, Tekeya Maria Matech Tekiya. They would blow Tekiya and then Trua without interruption. Tekiya straight and then a Tekiya. Tekiya and then a Trua straight. Ravasi Amar, he says slightly different. Tekeya Maria Beneshima Achas. Why they would do this, I think, to make a show that it's a little different than the average Friday. So the first opinion is that they would blow a Tekiya and then a Trua without a hefsek. The second opinion is that they would blow Tekiya and Trua in one breath. So the difference is being, would they take a breath in between? Okay. Iskin Ravasi Bahutzel Kashmaita Ravasi instituted in Hutzel like his approach, which is Tekiya and Trua in one breath. Meisvei, I have a kasha. Yom Tov Shechaliyas Be'erev Shabbos. The Brisa says that when Yom Tov falls out on Erev Shabbos, Taikin v'loy Marian. It says they blow shofar without a Trua. So we said before that there's a shofar and a Trua. One opinion said that there's no breath in between. One opinion says that there is a breath in between, but there was no other hefsek. It was right away. But over here it says Taikin v'loy Marian. My lav Marian klal is this not referring to that there's no Trua at all, but we said there is a Trua. Two different versions of how the Trua is done. So the Gemara says no, when it says no Trua, it doesn't mean no Trua at all. It means not the standard Tekiya and then Trua. There was either Tekiya and then Trua straight or Tekiya and Trua in the same breath. There was a Tekiya and a Trua, it just wasn't the standard. Loi, Rav Yehuda mitaretz tamei, Rav Asi mitaretz tamei, Rav Yehuda mitaretz tamei. Rav Yehuda will explain loy marim b'fnei atzmei l'matech tkiya. There was no true on its own; it was immediately following a tkiya. And Rav Asi mitaretz tamei loy marim b'shtei shimas l'neshima achas. Rav Asi says that when it says there's no trua, doesn't mean there's no trua at all. It means there's no trua in a separate breath. It's in one breath. Okay. We said on Motzei Shabbos going into Yom Tov, there's Havdalah, and you say Hamavdil bin Kodesh l'Kodesh. So here's the question: at what point in the Havdalah? Because let me read you the bracha. I'll just say Baruch Hashem Hamavdil bin Kodesh l'Chol ben Or l'Choshech. So Hamavdil bin Kodesh l'Chol is already said once. I standard Havdalah in the beginning. Hamavdil bin Kodesh l'Chol ben Or l'Choshech. Baruch Hashem Hamavdil bin Kodesh l'Chol. So it's said twice in the beginning and the end. When you said Hamavdil bin Kodesh l'Kodesh, is that in the beginning or the end or both? So Amar Rav Yehuda b'Chasima. It's Dafka said at the end. In the beginning, I don't think you make a distinction. You don't say it at all. It's Dafka Hamavdil bin Kodesh l'Kodesh is said at the end. Yes, I mean the beginning is Hamavdil bin Kodesh l'Chol. But Dafka say Hamavdil bin Kodesh l'Kodesh at the very end. He disagrees. He says both. In the beginning and the end, it's Hamavdil bin Kodesh l'Kodesh. But we don't pass him like him. He says that you add the word chomer and kal. We don't pass him that way. Just to finish up the parak, Amrav Zera, Yom Tiv shechaliyas be'emtza Shabbos. If Yom Tiv falls out in the middle of the week, let's say a Tuesday, Oimer, you say at the beginning of Havdalah, Hamavda bin Kodesh l'chol, bin Or l'choshech, bin Yisrael amim, bin Yom Ashvi l'sheshes me'amasa. Meaning, even though my timer, meaning, so the question is like this. Yeah, meaning, let's say you have Havdalah, let's say Shavuos is on a Tuesday. So let's say Shavuos, you're going to make Havdalah. You're going to say Hamad ben Kodesh l'Chol ben Or l'choshech ben Yisrael ben Yom Hashvi'i l'sheshes me'amasa. Yom Hashvi'i l'sheshes me'amasa. It's not Shabbos. It should say B'Yom Shlishi, whatever. Meaning, why is it that we always say that nusach, that standard nusach of the difference between Saturday and the Shabbos and the rest of the week, even when Yom Tov is said during a weekday? My time, what's the reason? Seder Havdalah Humayna. Because the purpose of Havdalah is to mention the differences, to mention the Havdalahs, the separations. And we want to mention all things that are separate, light and dark, holy and mundane, Shabbos and the rest of the week. So we always mention it, even if we're saying it on a Yom Tiv that is Chal B'Chol. Hadron Allah Chakol Shechten. I will stop here.